Good afternoon and welcome to today's reading of the Canterbury Tales. Today we'll be focusing on The Miller's Tale, A Barrel of Laughs. As you can see, my costume for today has me looking like a medieval maiden, but I will not kill you guys with a terrible accent. So let's begin. Down at Osney Mead in Oxford lived a carpenter called Oswald, a crusty old misery, just like him over there. But he'd married a pretty young thing called Allison. Now everyone was in love with Allison. She was as pert and as pretty as a squirrel up a tree, though to tell the truth, she should not have flirted so much with the men. Most of the time she was only joking, like with poor Absalom the clerk, but Absalom got quite the wrong idea. He was all set to elope with her whenever she said the word. Nicholas was a different pot of jam. Nicholas was a lodger in the carpenter's house, and Allison just could not take her eyes off of him. He was allowed to steal a kiss in the dark of the larder, and while he helped her hang out the washing. Scandalous. The carpenter, knowing he wasn't the prettiest duck in the pond, was fearfully jealous about his pretty young wife. He never let her go out alone, and trusted her in the company of no man, except Nicholas. Nicholas is an educated man, he would tell his neighbors proudly, a clever man, a religious man. It was true that Nicholas was clever. It was he who thought of the plot, after all, a plot to make an utter fool of the carpenter. He whispered the plot to Allison, who giggled behind her hand. Then he went to his room with food enough for a fortnight and locked himself in. "Where's Nicholas?" said the carpenter 3 days later. "He hasn't eaten with us since Monday." Then Allison wrung her hands. "I'm worried about him, husband. He locked himself in his room on Monday with nothing to eat. He won't answer to knocking. He must be ill. But what can I do?" "Well, why don't you say so, woman?" The carpenter leapt up the stairs and hammered on the lodger's door. "Nicholas, Nicholas, old son, open up, will you?" And when he got no answer, he threw himself against the door until it fell off its hinges. There sat Nicholas, bolt upright on the edge of his bed. His eyes were lifted towards the ceiling, and a strange humming came from his nose. "Lord have mercy, I told you he was religious," cried Oswald. "He's in some kind of trance. He's seeing visions." And shaking Nicholas by the hair, he shouted in his ear, "Wake up, boy, snap out of it." "What? Tell us, what?" Then Nicholas clapped the carpenter in an embrace and said tearfully, "You've been like a father to me, so I'm going to tell you a terrible secret. The angels themselves revealed it to me. The end of the world is coming." "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," said the carpenter, crossing himself. "What? Fire and brimstone?" "No, no," said Nicholas in the most saintly of voices. "Do you remember Noah?" "Well, of course I remember Noah," Oswald burst out excitedly. "Noah who?" Nicholas sighed with all the patience of a holy martyr. "You remember how in the Bible we are told that God sent rain for 40 days and 40 nights and the whole world was drowned, except for Noah who built an ark, that's to say, a boat. And he floated to safety and started up the human race all over again after the flood dried up. Is it rain then? Are we all to be drowned, me and you and little Allison and the cat?" All, said Nicholas in sepulchral tones, "unless—" He told the carpenter to fetch 3 big watertight barrels and to hang them up among the roof beams of the house by stout hemp ropes, barrel for each of them. When the rains come, the flood will rise and rise until it sets the barrels afloat. Then at a given signal we shall cut the ropes and float away on the tide. Take a bite of bread and cheese up there with you. We may be floating about for some time before God ends the flood." Calling down blessings from heaven on Nicholas, the carpenter hung the 3 barrels in the roof, climbed into one, and sat waiting for the flood. When, after an hour or so, it got so boring waiting for the flood, he dozed off and dreamt he was ruling the empty world with Allison on one side of his throne and Nicholas on the other. Down below, Nicholas and Allison fell into each other's arms in fits of helpless, silent laughter. They sat on the settle and held hands and kissed and carried on until the darkest hours of the night, when the whole town was asleep. A sudden soft tapping on the shutters made them both sit up with a start. It was followed by a quiet, high-pitched "Coo!" "Allison, it's me. It's Absalom." "Allison, sugar pie, honeybee, baby bubbles, chickadee. Give me a kiss, won't you? Everyone's asleep but you and me. Even the moon's hiding herself tonight. Now we can steal a kiss, can't we?" Allison clapped her hand over her mouth, and then whispered, "What shall I do, Nicholas? You'll wake Oswald." Sure enough, a bleary voice from overhead said, "Has the flood come? Is it time yet?" No, dear, go back to sleep, called Allison, and soon snores were rending the rafters like a bow saw. But still Absalom was at the window. What shall I do? Hissed Allison. I suppose he must have his kiss, said Nicholas, rising from the settle. The window was high up, higher than a man's head. In a voice as high as a filleted cod, Nicholas whispered through the shutter, Dearest boy, how I've longed for this moment. But close your eyes. It's not fitting that a woman should be seen in her night clothes, even on the darkest of nights, and even by one she loves so dearly. And he leaned out of the window to plant a kiss on Absalom's waiting lips. Allison burst into such a fit of giggles that she had to stuff her apron into her mouth, and still the laughter snorted and snuffled in her nose. Down in the street, Absalom heard the giggle, felt the Nicholas's beard tickle his chin, and guessed at the truth. He danced off down the road with such a heat of temper that his vest all but scorched, but not one sound escaped his lips, only silent, wicked curses. Nicholas gave that little snigger of his, and they returned to the settle to complete unfinished business. Tap, tap, tap. Absalom was back again. Allison, dearest, that one kiss has fired such love in me that I shan't sleep a wink without you kiss me again. Oh, make him be quiet, Nicholas, hissed Allison, and Nicholas smirked. Going to the window, he called through the shutters. This must be the last, my dear heart. Now close your eyes, won't you? You may kiss me now. And edging onto the windowsill, he proffered Absalom the seat of his pants. Absalom was waiting for him. He had been to the forge and heated a branding iron in the blacksmith's fire. Now he stood brandishing it like the devil with his pitchfork. And as Nicholas's trousers came through the window, Absalom lunged. They heard the scream all the way in Branbury. Up in his barrel, the carpenter woke to hear a noise very like the end of the world, and Nicholas' voice yelling, Water! Water! As he galloped around the room and fell over the settle. It's come! The rains have come, thought Oswald, and cut through the ropes tying his barrel to the roof, thinking to float away. He dropped like a stone, right on top of the settle, his wife, and the lodger. The cat, who had been sleeping in Oswald's lap, gave a yowl and leapt out of the window. It found the street full of neighbors tumbling out of their beds and out of their doors to find the cause of the commotion. The neighbors found Oswald, Nicholas, and Allison, the settle, a barrel, and a plentiful supply of bread and cheese, all squandered in a heap. The carpenter was shrieking, It's the end of the world! Swim for your lives! A trickle of smoke was still rising from the seat of the lodger's trousers. Now, before you go, it's interesting that he should mention bread at the end here, because the miller is the man who would grind up all of the grains to make flour for baking. Back then, there wasn't very much money to go around between peasants, and most of the people who had coins were wealthy. So peasants and tradesmen relied on a system of bartering, which means trading. So if I grind the grains and give you the flour, part of your payment might be to give me bread once it's baked. That's just a note. The more you know. Thank you.